Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start our afternoon, our evening for some of us, just taking a breath, taking a deep breath. Taking a breath for those of us who have not been able to take a deep breath in more than a week, in more than a month, in more than 6 months, and since before that time. Welcome to Blatant. We're going to begin with a poem by Maisha Jenkins.
Seem really rough and so this isn't particularly a good time in the world to me. Things seem really rough and it's hard and nightmares, daydreaming. When I had thought of this time, it was never like this. It didn't feel like the world was ending. No guarded whispers of the end of days. There is a bitterness here I did not foresee. Violence and threat, fear and loneliness, exhaustion and mental fatigue. I had thought this would be a time of new discovery, mental power, socialism, and love for our mother, the earth. Women and men producing their very best, freeing children to become whole and curious people. This life I live, nothing like that. It's a constant shock to my system. There was no way to know that life erodes like the seashore at low tide, that the demands of living carve you up on the butcher's block of change. There was no way to know back then about this time, this now.
Ashe. Our godmother, Maisha Jenkins, who was a pioneering poet, anti-apartheid activist from California, lived here in the Bay Area for many years, passed to the realm of the ancestors in her beloved home of Johannesburg, South Africa, where she moved to many, many years ago. And I had the gift of meeting her 2 years ago when I was working in Joburg. And so just honoring her and honoring the breath of Black women and welcoming you all today for Blatant. This is a monthly series hosted at the Museum of the African Diaspora. I'm your host, Ashara Ekundayo, independent curator and cultural strategist here. Through this platform, Artist as First Responder, I've invited my comrades, my sister and my friends, the beautiful artists who are Black women. And we wax poetic, on rage and joy and bliss and sex and children. It's uncensored, light discussion on art, joy, and rage. And it happens every third Tuesday here from 4 to 5:15 p.m. on Pacific time. We'll be here each month and we'll figure it out, as we go. It's not an academic conversation. It's not necessarily a
Share your sound cut out. Oh.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. So we're here. I want to give a land acknowledgement and invite my guests to also do so. I'm sitting here held up, as we say, on the unceded land of the Muwakma Ohlone and Ransom Ohlone Nation, here in Northern California, in this town of Oaks, they call Oakland. This is where I am sitting at right now. For those of you who are not familiar with the term unceded, it means that the First Nations people, the indigenous people, did not ever turn over, give up, or sell this land by treaty or otherwise to the government. It means that this is stolen land, that we are operating, living, creating, birthing, and dying on stolen land. And so in addition to having a few minutes with you all today to be able to share about artwork, about all the things that are important to us, you know, for this little bit of time, just this one moment, I'm also here to honor the Ohlone Nation, to honor the people, to honor this land that has been on fire. Here on this side of Turtle Island, some folks call this the United States, they call it North America as well, but this side of this continent has been on fire, and this land has been loved and continues to be loved by the Ohlone Nation. So with that, we want to take another breath. Today is the first day in 6 days that we have been able to open our windows, and there is ash everywhere. And you know, I think the first inclination is to go get your car washed and to wipe everything away and to try to clean it up. And there was an invitation that I saw on Facebook yesterday that said, that was really a reminder of what the ash is. In addition to being buildings and electronics and all those things that have burned down, it is also the ash of people, of animals, of the ancestor trees that could not escape the fire. And that we are invited to gather up some of that ash and add it to an ancestor altar, add it to some place where you honor your dead, and to not just wipe it away as though it is dirt. It is important as well. And it was not something I had thought about. So I just want to invite you all to also consider, even if you have not been in the smoke or the ash, we're all breathing the same air on this planet. We're all taking in the same water on this planet. And so you are going to come into contact with these ancestors who, you know, went up in the fire in our recent history. My friend, Dr. Courtney Desiree Morris, welcome today. And my friend, Helina Metaferia, welcome today. I want to invite you all to talk about the land that you are on and to also introduce each other, as is tradition on BLATANT, as we see each other, listen to and for each other. You have the floor. Helina, would you like to go?
Thank you. So I want to acknowledge the land that I am residing on. I want to acknowledge that I'm a settler on the Lenape land of New York City. And as we continue to occupy this land, let us remember that we're all a participant in this. I want to acknowledge my gracious host, Ashara. Thank you for the invitation. And my sibling, Courtney Desiree Morris, who I have the pleasure of introducing. Courtney is an Old English name that literally means from the court, or courtly, courteous, dignified. Her middle name is French and means desire. This has gotten her into some trouble in the past. Morris is also a British name inherited from a Jamaican slaveholder, and she is still sorting out what that really means. Courtney's pronouns are she, hers, but she also enjoys they because she likes the idea that she contains multitudes. Courtney was born in Fort Ord, California, on a military base that is now closed. She is a Gemini sun, Scorpio moon, and Libra rising. Trying to figure out how to balance all this air and some water. She has been sheltering in place in Berkeley, California, where she lives and works.
Ooh. Thank you, Helena, for that introduction. Kind of had to pause and take a breath because I just heard a fire truck roll by, which these days makes me very nervous. But I'm really excited to be here and to be able to share space with you and to be part of this conversation being facilitated by Ashara, who's so good at bringing people together and creating space for important conversations to happen. So thank you so much for having me. I currently live in Berkeley. So like Ashara, I'm also living in occupied Ohlone territory. And I'm very conscious of what it means to be living in that occupied landscape. And so with that, I'll go on ahead and introduce Helina Metaferia, who I'm really excited to talk to today. And so Helina's name is like just super powerful. It means conscious master to be afraid of in Amharic, which is one of the many languages spoken in Ethiopia. I looked it up and there's like 80 something languages spoken in Ethiopia. So it's quite remarkable. Amharic is apparently one of the most spoken languages, but her name literally translates into powerful. Her preferred pronouns are she or hers, or the dopest Ethiopian. She was born in Washington, D.C., and is a Scorpio rising, a Gemini sun, what's up, and a Taurus moon, and has been living in New York City during the shelter in place in this current pandemic.
Okay, y'all, with the Scorpio and the Taurus coming through.
And the Gemini, we've got some Gemini rising and sun.
I love a Gemini. I'm Aquarius, Taurus rising, Scorpio moon.
Oh, you in that mix. You in that.
Anyway,
energy right now, okay.
It gets real deep sometimes for me on that dreamscape, that Scorpio moon be just doing things.
Tell me about it. Anyway.
I thought, we've had such fun times, like just even thinking about having a conversation together. And I would normally say, let's jump right into our art conversation around your practices, but I actually want to jump a little bit to the side here and talk about, recent engagements, recent thoughts. This is just some opening conversation on blatant love, blatant art, and blatant rage. Something came up, in the last couple of weeks in terms of performing Black woman or Black women's performativity, identity. Courtney, break this down for us, because I because you started this conversation, or okay? Because break this down for folks who don't know where we're getting ready to go here.
I did bring it up, and I'm wondering, and I'm having mixed feelings. Part of me kind of regrets bringing it up, but I couldn't help it because I'm a bit obsessed with the story. So the long and short of it, for people who haven't been following the story, is that there was an academic, or is an academic, named Jessica Krug, who was teaching at George Washington University in their history department. She's a historian, has written a book that has actually been published to quite critical acclaim, and has been doing very well. It's published by a very reputable academic press, Duke University Press, and has been performing various sort of modes of diasporic Blackness for the last 20 years, first kind of claiming that she was North African, then later claiming a kind of, amorphous North American Blackness, and then more recently labeling herself a kind of Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latina, Puerto Rican Afro-Puerto Rican, Boricua Blackness. And, she did the whole academic hustle. She, got the PhD, wrote the book, got tenure, was doing all the things, was involved in a bunch of community organizing in the Bronx, and, had been presenting herself as Black. And then a couple of very rigorous Afro-Latina scholars found her out and were, about to call her out. And she published an article in Medium basically outing herself as a Jewish white woman who's been masquerading as a Black woman for the last 20 years.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a crazy story just in terms of thinking about like, what does it mean as a Black woman to watch someone like, I always think about that line in like Ntozake Shange's For Colored Girls when she's like, someone almost walked off with all of my stuff.
All of it.
Like, it totally felt like that. Like, this woman been walking around with my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening?
What is happening?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it?
Wow. Who was the other woman just a few years ago who was doing something very similar? Rachel Dolezal, right? I wonder what is the need to not just perform Black identity, Black womanhood, but also to be an expert in it, like to be an academic, like you must now come to me for lived knowledge and experience, which is false, right? And, I'm going to do all of the ritual of pretending. And I think it's deceptive, it's misleading. I think it's offensive. And it's like for play or amusement, it's by choice. I think a lot about how fair-skinned Black people had to pass in this country in the South, like back in the day, just to survive, right? And or to obtain some sort of privilege. And it makes me think about like, what is the choice and who gets to be this transracial identity, right? Like some of it can be for, I don't know what the purposes are behind like white people in blackface essentially, in their day-to-day life. But I wonder just the exhaustive privilege that it takes to pass, to have a trauma story, right? To pass for a trauma story, right? Or to want to be a part of a legacy, because it's not just trauma with Black folk. We come with great pride and history. What it means to want to participate in something, but also to dictate a little bit of how that gets told through academia, right? And so I think it's disturbing. And actually, you guys were the first ones to bring that to my attention because I was a little bit out of the loop for what was happening on the social medias. And so thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Well, as Courtney said, she's obsessed with the story. I'm not so obsessed, but one of the reasons that I thought it might be interesting to start our conversation today with it is because of the idea of site specific, being site specific, in her movement, inside of the academy, and us talking about embodied practice, which is one of the ways in which I know both of your work as embodied practitioners, as artists who move across genre, but also very much are about ritual making and the documentation of that. And just this performing of Black womanhood, at the same time that we are simultaneously being killed, being snuffed out, being silenced, our work being erased. We are still creating, and folks are still dreaming of what it's like to be a Black woman, what it's like to be Black, in this time of somewhat safety to be able to say Black Lives Matter, something that you might not have ever said and might not even still believe, but have been pulled to say, And so this conversation where, I want to know what my sisters think. I want to know how you all really feel about this, or if this kind of story is even taking up time in your psyche, so, we can move into another subject, but I just want to kind of like hang this here on the hook for later discussion as we look at some of the work that is that you all are performing, but not performing in the same thread. You know what I mean?
I think we're performing authenticity, and there's a vulnerability in that. Whereas from what I've seen of your work, Courtney, and myself, I don't think that we're wearing the mask of theater. I think that we're trying to dig into our own lived experiences, our ancestry, our, the nuances within our subject to tell a narrative that's often undertold. And so I think that that's the really defining difference in performance art or performative photography and video, which really beckons for some truth. I had a performance art teacher in graduate school tell me that, actors pretend to drink the glass of water, performance artists drink the glass of water. Like, we're very much invested in the actual and the real and the risks that are taken to be that vulnerable.
You've pinned it for me, and the word is vulnerability. So that authenticity, that lived experience, that willingness to not know what the next step is, not know what will happen when I take the drink. There's an inquiry that one of my mentors, Ellen Sebastian Chang, has taught me. It's a question that says, how much will you swallow? What are you willing to swallow? Mm-hmm. In that act of imbibing, that act of breathing in, taking in information, truth, or falsehood, that opportunity for us to also exhale, and to spew out, to allow out, to spit out, what are these actions that we're taking and that artists continue to take. I talked about the idea that this construct, this idea of artist as first responder, is also part of how I know both of your work, and that this ritual making that is also part of healing is part of a conversation that we were talking about in terms of connecting to nature, and to the natural world, and to the spiritual world, and how those spaces move within Africa and her diaspora. So let's take a little bit of a journey into the work that you've been doing. And we're going to start with Courtney, with your work. Thank you to Elizabeth for playing tech director today. And there's some folks who are in the Zoom room who are, shouting us out from San Francisco, from Oakland, from Chicago. So hello to them. There's a note in here that Cynthia put up that says, Ancestor Abby Lincoln, they will steal your ancestors if you let them. So we just trying to hold truth and speak truth to power here through this work. And so Courtney, walk us through these images that we're going to look at and the film that we're going to see.
Sure. So I work in a couple of different mediums. When I first really began making visual work, I think my sort of path to art, I imagined myself primarily as a writer, and kind of came to visual art sort of, I would say, by necessity. I just realized there were stories I wanted to tell that were much better told, rendered through the image than through text. And so about 5-6 years ago, wow, it's gone by really fast. I started doing these portraits of myself as different kinds of characters, rooted in the kind of ancestral stories of my families and the places where we come from. And part of that was really motivated by the sense that these Black landscapes that I grew up in and that were really central to my sense of who I am in the world. The detail about me growing up, being born on a military base, is actually really critical because I spent the first probably 10 years of my life bouncing around all over the place and feeling kind of rootless. So my sense of who I am as a person has really been by connecting to the places where my parents are from, and really anchoring into the kind of social landscapes and like family relationships that are tied to those places. And both of those places, all of those landscapes, whether it's, my father is from Jamaica, or, whether we're looking at South Florida, where some of the work was also shot, or Southwestern Louisiana, which for those of you who are following this, you know, was recently slammed by a hurricane. That whole town, Lake Charles, that's the area where my mother is from. You know, all those places are sort of imperiled. So the work was really about trying to reclaim those places and the kinds of stories about Black social life that live in those places. And so the first one, Cynthiann got some pretty pretty grandbabies. That's my mom, and that's my oldest niece, Kat. And it's them sitting on the land that used to be where my grandparents' house was, but that was recently torn down a few years ago after a petrochemical company came in and basically bought out the historic Black community where my mother was born and raised. And it's a community called Mossville. There's actually a documentary that just came out about it called Mossville and Great Trees Fall. So I would really recommend people check that out. But I wanted to shoot these images of like my mother and my family members and myself in this landscape because I could see it disappearing, and I wanted to create my own sort of counter archive that could outlive the place, which I never imagined I would have to do. So that's photograph comes from that series. This piece is called The Ancestors Prepare for Battle. And the sort of origin of this piece is that my father's family, when they left Jamaica and immigrated to the United States, they immigrated to a town called South Bay, which is very close to another small town called Belglade, that is best known for being the heart of kind of the sugar industry in South Florida. And so we're talking just like a complete, like hundreds of thousands of acres in South Florida that have been kind of radically transformed for the purposes of sugar cultivation. And so I went back to kind of stage these series of encounters with the past in the sugarcane fields of that region. And yeah, that character just kind of came to me in my sleep and was like, yeah, I need you to shoot me. And I was like, okay. She Who Sits with the Dead, Cynthiann Walks in Her Sleep. Those are also part of the Louisiana series, which is called solastalgia. Solastalgia is a term that was developed by an Australian environmental philosopher named Glenn Albrecht, who uses that term to describe the kind of sense of loss that people experience when they lose their home places due to ecological forces beyond their control. And that's absolutely what I experienced in Louisiana. And so, you know, I went back to try to, like I say, recreate my family's experiences there. Colored Swimming Pool is another. This was shot at the segregated community center that Black folks built in that town. And it's one of the few kind of remaining institutions in the community. It's still there, but what you can't tell from this image is that it's surrounded by petrochemical plants. So there's also something kind of weird about like being in a place that feels really beautiful and like is home, but that's also surrounded by all these things that are trying to kill you.
I've been interested in your apparel, and I'm wondering about the red dress and the black tights and the white shoes. If there's some cultural significance to your outfit, the white gloves, the white hat. You're such a proper lady.
Yeah, I mean, this one I was really going for like church lady, you know, like my mother grew up in a very religious household. My grandfather was a minister. He pastored a church for 20 years, not too far from the community. And my grandmother was, you know, a preacher's wife, who also happened to like, you know, curse like a sailor and like read you for filth if you needed to. And I just kind of, and so the hat I'm wearing is her hat. And I actually inherited that hat after she died 2 years ago. But I just remember as a kid growing up and like going to visit them and like seeing my grandmother get ready for church and just how beautiful she was and how like all of her kind of like femme glam sensibilities were, you know, sort of channeled through this, you know, through the sort of the aesthetics of the proper church lady. But there's also kind of like a fire under the church lady's attire, right? Like there's a sexiness to the church attire that I also kind of wanted to speak to. And I also just like the Shango energy of like a flaming red dress. And so, you know, I kind of wanted to play with all of that, like the demureness of the white hat and the white gloves, but like the fire and the sensuality and the power of a red dress. And King Queen #1 also came from the series in South Florida. And this one was kind of like, again, my work is really influenced by Orisha aesthetics, I would say. And so I like the idea of how Orisha embody different natural environments and elements and kind of weather patterns. And I remember thinking like, what would an Orisha of a cane field look like, you know? And so this sort of idea of, I mean, I guess there kind of is one, like Orisha Oko is kind of that, but you know, in terms of agriculture, but I like the idea of like a kind of feminine, divine energy that inhabits a cane field and that makes the work that people do there sacred. And so I came up with this, or I maybe came up as a little ambitious. She came to me. And yeah, I came up with this, like the ancestors, like, for real? Like you did that by yourself? Okay. But like how this figure sort of came to me was, you know, like this divine figure with a mask of cowrie shells and like a big burlap skirt. And I really loved that image and just the idea of like an Orisha walking through cane fields. Yeah.
Let's go to another red dress. So Bush Madonna.
Yeah, so you know, this is again part of the Louisiana series. The Louisiana series, I shot the Florida series really fast. Like I shot all those photographs basically in 72 hours and I was like, it's done. And it felt complete. The Louisiana series took me 3 years to shoot because it just took me longer to kind of figure out what the relationship was, like who were the characters and what were their relationships to the landscape. And what I realized is that really, I just wanted to play my mother and my grandmother. And then this sort of, you know, also kind of thinking about our relationship to indigeneity in that landscape. So there's an indigenous ancestral figure who comes up, who is the character who you find in the cemetery. But the Bush Madonna is like my grandmother at her most sort of like, you know, kind of powerful, fertile, just like she's this sort of domestic figure in this kind of abandoned and ruined landscape who somehow manages to create life and beauty, which is, you know, I kind of think what Black women do in general. That's kind of our superpower. And so I like this image was really about kind of speaking to that. And it basically was a house that had stood, again, when this petrochemical company came in and bought out the town, the company bought people out. So they were able to leave the community, but before they left, they had to tear down their own houses. And I remember thinking that was just such a trauma and a violence to have to tear down your own home. And so, you know, when I saw this sort of like, this was somebody's front porch, you know, like you can just like see the steps like leading up to what would have been the front door. And so when I saw that, I was just like, oh, I just got to shoot this here. Like, I wanted to try to recreate these kind of domestic scenes of Black family life in places where the structures were no longer there, but like the memory of what kind of lives happened in those places still kind of lingered.
I mean, one of the conversations that we could spend a lot of time on is really around that intersection of displacement, of climate crisis, of Black families, particularly of Black women, and of the land. It's a place that is vitally important that we understand kind of like the intersectional power that we are called to meet each other at right now. You know, that we cannot actually speak about hurricanes and wildfires without speaking about white supremacy and the way in which the structures and the institutions of our culture have allowed for such large discrepancy, such huge, you know, chasms in between folks who have and folks who do not, you know, and to also insert the conversation on spiritual practice and understanding of the divine feminine of course, I think comes up very much so in your work, this you placing yourself on the land and placing yourself in relationship, honestly, to architecture, to the built environment. And so, these considerations as we're in the midst of what is, for some people, the most blatant experience of climate catastrophe that we're in right now, as different parts of the United States and different parts of the entire world are undergoing some of the most devastating and unprecedented environmental situations they've ever seen.
Yeah.
This conversation that you're having around petrochemicals and our addiction to oil, what that has done to the community is important. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah. Can I respond to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say briefly, I think one of the things, it's true, those are definitely questions that I'm really interested in, right? Like the intersections of spirituality and ritual and place and the environment, and like, what does it mean to lose places that where your sense of self is tied up in those places? What does it mean for a place to die? And I think with the Louisiana story in particular, I was really motivated by this question of like, Black people have very rigorous traditions for mourning our dead all over the diaspora. We're quite skilled at it, and we know how to mourn people. But I was like, oh, I don't know how you mourn a place. Like, nobody has a funeral for a place, So what would that look like? And, it's one of the things that why, even, how we open this conversation about, acknowledging the indigenous, territory upon which we stand and we do our work is like, I think one of the really productive things about engaging with questions of indigeneity is that like, Indigenous people have also thought about these questions in really deep ways. Like, what does it mean for a place to die, for your relationship to a place to die? And it really helps you reframe your relationship, like as human beings, to places, right? Like places aren't just places that we act upon, but that places are also always acting on us. And we have to sort of reframe our relationship to the geographic in order to rethink what it means to be human, I think. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. I want to move through these next couple of images fairly quickly and stop on, I think, the image after this to talk about this series and then watch a film. But, in this place of prayer and meditation, talk a little bit about your performance practice.
Yeah, so I mean, I was doing performance art, when I was an undergrad. I was a part of a group called the Austin Project that was founded by a performance artist and theater scholar named Omi Jones. And that was facilitated by Sharon Bridgeforth. And we would have all kinds of artists come through, like Lori Carlos, Carl Hancock Rux. And so I was doing a lot of kind of like performance style art in that space as an undergrad, and then like left, went to grad school, became an anthropologist, got a PhD, like did this whole other thing, and have only really recently, like in the last 4 years, returned to performance art. And what prompted the return to that genre of work was in 2017, I had the opportunity to go to Palestine. And while I was there, there was a prisoner strike that was going on of Palestinians who were being held in Israeli detention centers, both within like Israel proper and within the West Bank. And these folks were on strike. They were on a hunger strike that had gone on. When we got there, it had been going on for maybe like 20 days. And by the time it ended, the strike went on for something like 43 days. And all people were consuming in that time was water with salt. And I was really affected by that experience of just like waking up every morning and thinking like, are they still alive? Like, what's happening? And so much of my work at that point had been focused on places that I already had relationships to and I was really familiar with. And I didn't have some kind of organic relationship to Palestine, like a family relationship or an ancestral relationship, but I felt that I wanted to speak to what was happening in that moment. And so I, came up with this idea of a performance called I Am Ceremonial, which is from a poem by a Palestinian poet. And the line says something like, "No garments on me but Jerusalem. I am ceremonial." And I, wanted to sort of, I was also really influenced by June Jordan and her poem about Palestine and her writings about Palestine, and like being a Black woman, but becoming Palestinian through this sort of practice of deep and rigorous solidarity. And so, I basically came up with this idea of like, I'm gonna walk through the streets of East Jerusalem. It was also during Ramadan, so it was very busy. Like it was, people were out on the streets at nighttime. It was really festive. There were all these people out and about. And so I walked through the streets of East Jerusalem where we were staying and like spread out a scarf on the ground and then basically just put my hands above my head in the, arrest pose, and held that for as long as I could, up until that guy who you see in the picture, who was like, I found out later, like a neighborhood drunk who was very concerned about my safety, like kept trying to fix my scarf. And then at a certain point, like bodily picked me up and like carried me away. And then bought me a cup of roasted corn. But he was very worried about me. And I was, I gotta confess, I was fucking terrified doing this performance. Like there were, Israeli police officers, not 15 feet away. It was a really volatile situation, but it felt like, again, taking on an identity that's not mine, but trying to do so in a way that wasn't about caricaturing other people's cultural identities, but was about trying to get to something more vulnerable and real. And thinking about like these parallels between Black and Palestinian life and like what it means to live under occupation, what it means to live with state violence, how does it like, how does it feel to kind of live in a police state? All of those things. So yeah, that was the first performance art piece I ever did in 2017.
The neighborhood, one of the neighborhood beings who sees all things, as
Yeah.
I understand.
We had a really beautiful encounter afterwards. He was like, "I just didn't want you to get hurt," and I was like, "I hear that. Thank you."
We're gonna close this part of the conversation watching a video about Nia Wilson, who was an 18-year-old Black woman who lived in Oakland, California, who was, she and her sisters were traveling on a BART train home from a family gathering and she was stabbed, her sister Latifah was also stabbed, and Nia died actually on the platform. So let's watch this video. This is one of the ways in which I've come to know your work. It was kind of my introduction to your work, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you for playing that.
In the circle, there is safety. In the circle, there is love. In the circle, there is freedom. In the circle, there is peace. We be the circle, the endless chain that links ancestors, the living, and those on their way. Hold the circle. Nia is a sacred name. In Swahili, it means purpose. In Welsh, it means radiant light. In Hindi, one who was desired or prayed for. In Oakland, Nia is a black girl with plans, a little sister who's going places. But there's so many forces trying to put out her light. Little sister of bright purpose, whose light was taken too soon, who was not meant to be a child ancestor. She does not yet know the old ways. Who will protect this black girl's light? The sistren gather in the street and they cry. Who will teach our little sister the language of the dead? Who will remember her in the land of the living? Who will protect this black girl's light? Little sister of bright purpose. In the circle there is freedom. In the circle there is love. Wrong is not my name. 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 My name is Nia. My name is Sandra. My name is Corinne. My name is Ayana. My name is Rakia. Wrong is not my name. Hold the circle. Hold the circle.
Yes. Take a breath for Nia Wilson, calling her name today. Today is also the 57th anniversary of the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. There were 5 little girls who were in the bathroom. You know, they had been at choir rehearsal or something that day, and 4 of those little girls died. And, you know, some of us know that that is African American history, the bombing of the 16th Street Church. And so I also want to call the names of Addie Mae Collins and Denise McNair and Carol Robinson and Cynthia Wesley, who died 57 years ago on this date. And to also honor Sarah Collins, who's the little girl who survived that blast. Yeah, that these are conversations that we have to continually bring up. I note today that we say a settlement of $12 million was offered to the family of Breonna Taylor today, but not the arrest of the police officers who murdered her in her home. So an example of blatant rage for me, just incensed by it, but also aware of the artistry of telling these stories. So thank you, Courtney, for that.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So Helina, so much here for us to witness as well in your work. You're on mute, by the way, so I don't want you to start talking, okay? Okay, start talking, we want to hear you. Walk us through an introduction of your practice, and then we're going to, watch a series of videos and images as well. And,
Thank you. Thank you, Courtney, for sharing your work. It's really nice to hear your process. I can get so much more hearing from an artist rather than just viewing their work in another context. So thank you for that. And I also want to acknowledge that today is also Eric Garner's birthday. May he rest in peace. And so when just thinking of remembrance, I'm thinking about the many, many lives that are undocumented, that we don't know, who have died from police violence or some other form of hate. And so, you know, I hope that as artists that we can, those of us who feel called, can use our platform to continue to advocate and to, you know, if you feel called to think about spaces of healing, our communities are definitely in need of that. My practice is an interdisciplinary practice. It is one that's grounded with a through line in the body, embodiment, thinking about identity and identity politics, but also the politics of space. And so I'm interrogating those things through the use of my own body. Assemblage, installation. My first hand in art was painting, and I was an active painter, majored in that in undergrad and painted exclusively, but I fell down the rabbit hole of
I think we're having a little bit of a technical glitch here, and I'm not sure if it's on my end or.
Pardon?
We're having a little bit of a technical.
Okay. Did you hear anything I said?
But like maybe the last 7 seconds of something, if you could repeat that.
Yeah, I'll go back a little bit, and I apologize for that. So my practice is interdisciplinary, and I ground it in performance, and I fell down the rabbit hole of performance in graduate school, where I studied with Afro-Cuban artist Maria Magdalena Campos Pons. And I really wanted to get into performance because being in front of people felt liberating. The gaze was freaking a powerful medium to work with, but it was also very scary. And so I wanted to lean into what felt scary. I knew if I was going into that, then I was heading in the right direction, because I think that everything about art it's an internal journey of creativity. And the more depth you get, the more you have to face yourself as a maker. And you also have to face your community, who you're accountable for, your audience. And I think this love affair with art will continue and continue. So we can bring up the artwork. I can talk over the first video. So I wanted to start with, because this is through MOAD, the first solo show that I had at MOAD, the first show I had at MOAD, which was also a solo show in 2017. And I wanted to just show some of the video. If you can still hear me, just like nod and let me know that, okay, good. So this is documentation excerpt of what was about a 9-minute video. The second video in this compilation was about 11 minutes. And I was thinking about precariousness as it relates to displacement and the uncertainty that I was feeling when I lived in the Bay Area from 2015 to 2017, and really on the verge of homelessness. And so I was reckoning with that, and really the unaffordability of the city had something to do with that. But it was also just thinking about migration in general, being first generation Ethiopian American, thinking about voluntary and involuntary ways in which people have our circumstances shift, mainly through gentrification or some other economic reason, but also for political situations. So I was trying to map out precariousness, essentially, and I was doing this divination series. I was thinking about divination as a way to sort of tell one's fortune or one's ability to see and read. So instead of reading tea leaves, I was reading wooden flooring in this case. So this is appropriate, this is found wooden flooring from buildings that were, you know, discarded in San Francisco. And, you know, playing with them, also thinking really formally, having a painting background, have an interest in abstraction and figuration simultaneously. So I'm usually trying to create abstraction with the entire body. And so this ability to play also lend itself into like just a studio investigation in shape and sound. And the resulting installation that came from that drawing and from, is the next slide, yeah. So this is kind of what it looked like in space. I was obsessed with this color, heritage red, and I used it in absolutely everything. I found it at Benjamin Moore. You can actually commodify heritage and you can package it up. And I love that idea. I wanted something that reminded me of bloodlines and ancestral trajectories. And so next slide. Other works in the exhibition included the gathering of ephemera of soil and rocks and sand from the Bay Area locally, as well as used door parts and bricks. I wanted to repurpose objects that had a history and give it a new history by activating it through performance. And in this way, I was thinking about amulets. I called this amulets for this place. And I was thinking a lot about my own Ethiopian American art history. I'm very interested in the way that divination is used, but also talisman traditions. And I've been studying that independently for some time. Next slide. So this idea that the object is not a sacred thing as we know it in the West to be in Western art history, that is something that can be activated and used. I love in Ethiopian art history how, you know, performance intersects with visual art objects. Visual art objects are visual medicine. And when you look at something, it actually has the components of healing on you. I love that it's bodily. I love that you wear the talisman. I love that you touch it, you know, and it's not this like thing on a pedestal, right? And so I try to really integrate that in my work. Next slide, please. This is like conceptual performative photography. And, you know, I'm also just really playing formally. Like I love color, you know, as a former painter, I still paint sometimes. I really love color. I think color is an amazing frequency to work with of, you know, using sight in that way. And I love touch. And so these are the things that I'm playing with. Next slide, please. We can just watch this video and I can talk a little bit over it. This is the video that I did of the live performance at MOAD for my solo show, Home Free. And I collaborated with Zina Carlota, who's a Bay Area wonderful Oakland-based musician.
Love to the brim.
Graduate students now teaching at the San Francisco.
You can build your walls or your bands. Try to create more borders on top of borders. It's not enough. You just fueled me with some ammunition. You fueled us with ammunition to fight and to love harder.
So in this performance, it was about 20 minutes. I basically reactivated everything in the exhibition. There was a performance.
Love is
one live performance.
Love is
Respect.
Love is
Sweet.
And right now I'm thinking a lot about survival, and I think so much about community and leaning into my community forming community, building community around me as a method of survival that we've historically used. People who felt disenfranchised have built coalitions. We've done care work without pay through a capitalist system, right? Like, I'm thinking about how anti-capitalist community building is and can be, and how when, you know, there is, I guess coming from a very communal culture in Ethiopia, that's something I think about has been our one of our survival tactics as a people. And when there is times of flux, how we can lean into each other. And so in this time of social distancing, I'm still here trying to form community, even if it's initiates through virtual or through 6 feet or something. The next body of work that I'm going to show, we can go back one slide, is it's just a few images, and this is the last body of work. It's from my ancestral honoring series. So this was at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I wore a wearable sculpture, and this wearable sculpture is made out of family photographs, and it's maps of Washington, D.C. and Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the two capital cities. I was born in D.C. and my family lives in Addis. And so I was thinking about mapping a trajectory of lineage. And so I performed this in front of a live audience for about 30 minutes. The next slide is, so my mother helped me find those archives essentially, and then she passed away a year later. And so I did this memorial for her. And so much of my work is impacted by personal experience, again, like displacement and you know, feeling displaced in the Bay Area through a housing crisis, feeling loss and grief and needing to mourn. And so I did another honoring for her at 5 Miles Gallery in Brooklyn. And there's something about a live audience, which these could be private things. I could do a private memorial for my mother who passed, but there's something about accountability and like witness, like when you show up and somebody shows up and they give you your time, which is precious energy, like you can't get that back. There's this accountability in that. So I dug up pages of her unfinished manuscript about her activism work as an Ethiopian women's rights activist. And I did that ritual for her. Next slide. The last project I'll show you is something that I actually just did maybe a month ago, actually a month ago today. And this was at Grand Army Plaza in Brooklyn. And so it's of the same series. It's another ancestral honoring, this time commemorating Black women suffragettes who on the centennial where white women got their right to vote in this country. I was thinking about a lot of things. I was thinking about Kamala Harris. I was thinking about the stuff that we're going through and precariousness of our time, and how I cannot take for granted, especially as an Ethiopian American, all the people that in this country who've paved the way for me to be able to be here right now and to be able to have these sort of freedoms that we all experience, and how much more we have to do to become free and liberated, right? So in saying their names, I was saying, you know, Ida B. Wells' names. I was saying Sarah Parker Raymond's name. I was saying the women who, you know, did things like having to pass in order to get access to certain spaces, in order to actually go back into Black community and help those who need it. So some Black women who passed in white women suffrage movement circles in order to advocate, essentially. And so thinking back to that earlier conversation we had about that woman. So anyway, this I'll just show you the video, and this will be the last thing that I show. This is like a quick excerpt from that performance. And this performance was done in conjunction with the Wide Awakes, who is an activist in New York City, but all over the country. And the vocals is by Sarah Johns. Chanel Johns, sorry.
our children, our grandchildren, and those after that.
But it was about a 15-minute performance. So yeah, I want to leave some time for discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that ceremony, that ritual. I know we've been, through this series and through this conversation that the three of us have been having, also the idea of Black feminist art as apocalyptic intervention. I see these continued opportunities and witnessing of ritual making here, this visceral healing, this pulling. I'm just aware of my heart beating in my chest as I watched, you in that fluid, just kind of like stomping it out in the way in which Black women, the way our mamas and aunts and grandmas and cousins and siblings have done. What that means now, to be squarely inside of this feminist understanding, this praxis, as well as epistemology, but this movement that we are making here. So, as we wrap up the show, Courtney, do you want to respond to Helina? We can respond to each other. It's so many things in so few minutes. You're on mute. And you're on mute right now.
Sorry, I got so excited I didn't even unmute myself. I mean, child, where to begin? I mean, the work is so beautiful and powerful. I saw someone had posted in the chat, it popped up the word visceral. I really feel your work in my body, there's so much power in those images. Like the last one, I just kept thinking about blood. Like there's something about like there's like a beauty to it, but there's also kind of like a latent violence to it too. And just sort of thinking about all the sort of layers, like what it means to get a vote, to access to the franchise. There's so much violence that one encounters in the pursuit of rights that is often unremarked upon, right? So there's something really perverse, I think, in this moment about celebrating women's access to the franchise while we're, not talking about these other forms of violence that Black women have experienced in their pursuit of rights. And so I found myself thinking about that as I was watching you and, just feeling like, wow, there's just so much energy in this work, and I also feel like the Campos poem's influence on the work too, like but it's its own thing, so it's like I can see the influence, but it's also like where you take it and how you sort of alchemize that influence in your own work and like are pursuing other kinds of stories is really fascinating to me. So I was very moved by all of the pieces, but I know there's probably other people who want to ask questions and engage too, but if you want to have that conversation later, we can totally do that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Black feminist art as apocalyptic intervention.
Yeah.
Someone says, say that again, say it again. That's what some of this work looks like. As we're closing out the show, I want to ask you all what we always ask at the end is, what was your last witnessing of blatant joy or blatant rage?
Well, I'll say community again. I'll go back to that. I will say I've, been feeling like most people very, it's an isolated time. everything is canceled. Might as well just cancel 2020. Like, it just feels crazy. So much death, so much devastation, and, just people are hurting, on many levels. And actually, when I leave here, I'm going to go to another event. It's like the Blacksmiths and the Wide Awakes are doing another event in the city, in Brooklyn. And I was just thinking, like, that's been sustaining me, is just gathering with other artists physically and, protected, masks on, 6 feet, whatever, hands in, but like, protesting and protesting through art and joy, right? Like, not through just, I've been a part of different protests since, the uprisings, and there's all kinds of energy, but like, how can we hold space for the fact that we can just appreciate beauty and togetherness? And that's what's been holding me sane.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Courtney?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a tough question. I feel like because we've been so isolated in the Bay, it feels like the fires kind of managed to do what the pandemic didn't. I found that I was spending a lot of time outside in nature, and that was really giving me a lot of energy. And then the fires took that away. So a lot of my sort of social engagement now is happening via social media. So my encounters with blatant joy and blatant rage are taking place in that platform. And so probably the last thing I saw that felt like blatant joy was a post that Mahershala Ali had posted of him with a little girl who may have been his daughter, I don't know. But she was just like shaking her head back and forth, and her braids were like flying and hitting her face. And it was like the happiest I had seen a little Black girl look in a very long time. It just filled me with happiness. And so I, just took a lot of pleasure, derived a lot of pleasure from that. And then rage is just, again, like watching people in the streets protesting. I think the whole summer has just been, but it's felt like a righteous rage, like watching a flood just pour across the country and just like cleansing this rotten, the rest, as we call it, the shit stem that we're living under. Like, it has to die.
Thank you both for your time today. Thank you for all of our folks who are watching for these considerations and these imaginations. And I want to invite you all to go and take a look at the Blatant zine in conjunction with these conversations. There are these opportunities for us to create ephemera, to have, limited edition, but also to like have open source artwork. So there's a website up. It's at ashara.io/blatant-zine. And Courtney, your piece here, The Ancestors Prepare for Battle, is on the August cover.
Great piece.
Yes, so striking. And the Blatant zine will also be available at the MOAD bookstore very soon. So, well, let's see if we can put the link in the chat for you all to just go there. But there's a free download. And so, with that, I want to thank our partners, and specifically Art Bridges, who really sponsors all of the online programming for the Museum of the African Diaspora. And we're really honored to have them also partner with us. Yes, there you go. And you can support the museum as well. It's like we offer these conversations free. If you all have not been paying attention to the MOAD online programming, you're missing out. It's just bananas and so robust and so real. You can see this show and all of the other programming that they do on their YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and just put in Museum of the African Diaspora, so many things will be there for you to see, but you can go to the website at moadsf.org/donate, and you can donate to continue this programming. You can also text 56512 and text MOAD SF. And you can make a donation. Any donation is good. And so, as we continue to bring these kinds of conversations to be able to wax poetic, will be amazing. We'll put the link to the zine in next month, October 20th, which is the third Tuesday. I will be visiting with my comrades and beloveds Amara Tabois Smith and Savannah Shangay. In more righteous art, joy, and rage. So do join us for that. And let's see if we can just type this in. Link to the zine. Okay. Putting it in. Is there anything you would like to say in closing, brief closing? Special thanks to all of the artists as first responders that you all represent in my life as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for putting this together. Thank you to MOAD. Thank you for Elizabeth for handling all the tech, and for everyone who's paid attention. And you can't have a forum without folks, giving their time. And I know how valuable time is in our Zoom, like, overdrive society that we live in right now. So I just want to thank everyone who participated. Yeah. And to you, Courtney, as well. Thank you so much for being in conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you to Ashara for the invitation, for MOAD for hosting us, and everyone who was able to make it out and supports the work of Black feminist artists. And special shouts to Elizabeth for just being amazing. It was really lovely to be in conversation with Helina and with Ashara. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next month on the 3rd, Tuesday, October 20th, for another conversation on blatant art, joy, and rage. Peace.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.